But when you don't have the rent money, it assumes a literal reality in relationship to it.
Yeah.
And the closer you get to it, it literalizes and it squeezes everything else out.
Why is that?
So then we say, okay, then you see, well, you understand that you are then moving where relationship. So then our perspective of a relationship to money was the freedom from money being a dictator in our life. You see, that's how normally somehow it runs, where people may object to that stuff. So you see in many of these countries, that's what's happening. The people are kind of not even objecting to, they're objecting to a kind of slavery in their life without fully knowing exactly what that is, but that some force overhead is dictating what can happen for them and what can't happen for them.
Yeah.
So you see that they're aware of forces, and they're intuitive forces. They are really there. But so let's say as you enter into a story that is based on a feeling and shared, and it's only out of that feeling that all of the things could have happened. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say a feeling unlocked certain hidden chambers to some degree, and then it naturalizes a happening that you wouldn't have thought of. It an accidental happens becomes a creative expression.
Right.
And so then you see for you, life is a creative expression. It's not a literal situation. You're not literally a mother, a father, or this. You're not literally a white person or this. You're like, these are kind of elements of the more the film or the story or the creative thing that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Where you've assumed this character. So then this character is coming from an energy where the rest of the people that it meets is coming from a history. So when you come more from a mystery, you reveal the history is kind of bullshit. And you say, well, hold it, they can't see it. I say, what do you mean the mystery is kind of bullshit? You're making America great like this to fight for, but you also know it's based on old white guys that created the thing. Nobody else, any other different than those old white guys had no say in it. They got rid of them and this and that. The women had to work in the thing. The black people, the Spanish people, they had to do work in the farms or something, but the white guys ran the joint the last 600 or 700 years. And so you see them in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And they have another kind of story going. And that's our kind of story, which is more a romantic thing happen, a creative thing happen, a people's desire to be free of something, to live free lives and all that. So you see that we have a relationship to what they would consider naive, but to us is a creative life. That somehow we've acted as if we've been free. And not crazy people or this people, that people, but we've acted as if we were free to be there, to do this, to hook up, to connect, to try things. In a world that seemingly is saying, no, you have to literally do this. And is that Derek there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. How are you, Derek?
I'm okay.
So what happens when we find ourselves creatively in a literal situation? What do you say? And somehow the literalization has its own, you can't do this and this can't happen. And all of it is relatively true if you're in it. But outside of it, creatively, you see there's a sense of freedom. So if it was a theater that you were in, and not a makeup theater, but it was an actual theater that you were in, that it represented almost precisely the situation you're in. And you're seeing then the situation you're in from being a director of the play to some degree. You shed a light on something that is happening anyway, but it's not figured into the circumstance in some way. And they say, why? They say, we're a kind of, not only you in the story, but a consciousness of you enters into the story. And so that means what? And I say that you see something that touches you deeply, that awakens a medium, that makes you somewhat different than the mob or the little structure that you're in, where you're seeing something from an individual's perspective and something. And when you see an individual's perspective of something, you can no longer be hypnotized back into the story in the same way. So then if you come back into the story, especially if you've been in trying situations of the service or something, like you're coming back into the story, then you say, no, America really means America to you then. It doesn't mean this. And it's more like a movie where the movies play and the music play. But however dopey it sounds, it's more like a movie in its truth than it is, and that it's that it was a heroic thing. It was done as a feeling and a sentiment shared and friendship. But so when you literalize the story, it's like you see people eating Oreo cookies and how happy they are on TV and they're singing. But then if you got a job in the Oreo cookie factory, it would be like being sentenced to purgatory or, you know what I mean, or years in jail. Okay, we're getting $7 an hour in the Oreo cookie factory. We hated Oreo. So if you worked in the Oreo cookie factory, you hated Oreo cookies.
Mhm.
If you didn't, I guess they sold it by their tons everywhere, Oreo cookies. So it's a strange thing if you see the origins of the thing. So let's say you then again have perspective insight when there is somehow an agreement that this is in fact, and now what is an agreement? Is that everyone in the situation is on board with what is happening, prospectively? Because they are anyway. But by normalcy, but then everyone has their own. But one thing is missing is a kind of light shed on a happening. It looks like this is force and that is happening, but there's somehow an agreement happening.
Mm.
And everyone's acting like it's normal. You understand? Where it wouldn't be normal unless there was some kind of feeling that connected it in some way. Because without the normalcy of it, it would be, holy shit, what the hell am I doing? Instantly. And everyone would say, holy shit, what the hell are we doing? And you see a holy shit moment with perception when everyone says, okay, look, this is what is happening. As a family, we're trying to look out for each other and do the right thing. And so it has that conversation. But you know that this has been looking. So then, what an impossible conversation. And yet you see that conversation is in the future, accidentally. Each person will see it. But somehow, it is not therapeutic. It is not psychological. It visits all those places. But as long as somehow a thread or a feeling remains, it remains in some version of itself. So let's say somehow you see not only your life being lived as a literal life being lived, but you see how many episodes you've lived, how many different situations it's been in, where a thread remains similar to it that runs through it. And you get a glimpse of the creative aspect of it. And you also get a creative aspect. I remember sometimes where a creative project turned into a job. A play that was being put on in the town became then into a literal job that everyone needed it or something like that.
Mm.
Then it started to become something else. But before it was more of just a shared community thing.
Mm.
So let's say you see those elements in your own life that it literalizes. And when it literalizes for you, you start to see that becomes your biggest element is a honest conversation that's shared. And it's not only a conversation, you see that the deep friends is just a shared space, and then you can try things. Once the feeling is there, you can try things. It gives the things that you're trying an energy. when somehow it's a shared feeling. If it ceases to be a shared feeling and it interrupts it or whatever, then you also see, if the friendship is interrupted, then you also see this, the thing shared is also interrupted to some degree, because access to it was kind of based on a feeling.
Mm.
So you see to some degree that much of your philosophical feeling structure is based on people sharing a feeling. And when people share a feeling, they can try things as a shared experience in themselves that that the shared feeling allowed, because the shared feeling had a kind of a shared life to some degree. And when the feeling is deeply shared that way personally, you see the people experience with you a side of the life that's hidden from your everyday life in the friendship.
Yeah.
Hmm? And so you see that your everyday life is you are literally this, but in fact, in your evocative life, there's a shared energy where the life is being looked at from a different place. So then you're kind of conveying, can one live in the energy in real time?
Yeah.
Because then in real time, what is normal for real time people is not normal if you're enslaved creatively, if the creative feelings aren't shared. Hmm?
Mhm.
So then you see that the creative feelings are shared with a secret life. You don't want to make it a sneaky life, and you don't want to make it a hidden life, or that you have to hide it or this or that. But you see that the creative feelings are shared with those who are sharing a creative experience with you of the life. And then are looking at you as a reflection. Can one bring a creative feeling into the everyday life? And then it says, well, what happens when the feelings shift? And then you find yourself in circumstance where there's no communication of it, where there's a degree of aloneness with it, while at the same time they're not calling upon you to explore or to see or to find out, but they want you to wash the dishes and cut the thing and clean the toilet. And I say, okay, then what does it, let's look. What did it take when they made Jesus do all that? Then he had to make his own cross and at each stage of the way. And they say, you feel a humiliation. Without it, you're doing it anyway, but you also understand that there's a humbling of you. Hmm? And that the main premise was, in fact, a respect for you, a kind of presence that you brought. And then out of that respect for a presence that you brought, then it created a situation. But the situation without that presence, without that feeling is missed. So you see, it can't let it go either. Because then it would experience you big time in your absence. Where your presence is ba 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 ba, your absence would be really you. Do you understand? Because then they would experience whatever persona you are to them, they would experience Shakti first. As you, so let's say that there are many lives seemingly being lived in one life. And that as you experience in yourself a kind of space between yourself and the literal world, the literal situation, you kind of understand that almost everyone in the experience is having their own version of that privately also. So then what would be questions that happen in the literal world? And that would be continuity. It would be worry about security or stability or keeping it together or something like that. Is the primary force in a circumstance? So you meet your life And it's not only your life, but you also see, to the degree that you see it, then you see not only a larger picture of a life that you've lived, but you also see the creative dimensions of the situations that you've been in others' lives. And you see the remarkableness of what, as it's no longer your life and your possessive, and you see it in retrospect, you see the remarkableness of this passage that you went through. To come to this moment, how you had to navigate through a world that, and somehow you had to act like it was normal. And yet each one of your normalcies is very different from the other normalcies, like different movies you've made. You know what I mean? If you ever brought all these characters together into one room. Okay. So you've lived a life. And I cannot, I say it still seems to be creative. Somehow any movement that you make has to speak to you.
Yes.
And you see that creatively it's coexisting. But still somehow it comes to you through something touching you or feeling or. And do you want the job?
No, no more jobs.
Okay, so do you want to hit the Publishers Clearinghouse thing for $7,000 a week for the rest of your life?
Something like that. Yeah.
So then you would understand that money would free you from money. You don't need to make 10 Z and 7,000 a week for the rest of your life. It will probably allow you to manage a circumstance where you're in it, but you're not of it. Where it can become $1 billion, it can become this and it become that, but whatever it is creatively, it's allowing you to be free.
Mm-hmm.
So now say you hit Publishers Clearinghouse there today, and then tonight you make an announcement to everyone.
I don't think I'd tell anybody.
You don't think you want to practice that you hit the lottery and that you have?
I wouldn't tell anybody. Well, I'd tell you. That's about it. I'd give Tico a lot of money to play with on the stock market.
Okay, no, and then you say, I wouldn't play with any of it. I would just say, as I say to you, the money allows you to be free from the literalness of money because there's a slavery in it. And the first premise for us is that the money allowed a kind of creative freedom. You know, so the freedom doesn't mean, but it does mean something is released. The story is released from a big, because then you saw a big premise that gauged everything. It was money. He ran through the story, literally. And I say, how? And I say, as you entered into the system then became, your relationship then became a job of sorts. You know, and so then you moved together in a continuity of circumstance. You borrowed money, you did this, you made a literal reality. So it literalizes, and you're signing contracts about something that's always in flux. So they say, well, what would the free person, or maybe as an artist who's in flux, he visits a place, but then if he visits for a month, he has to sign a 5-year lease. And he knows he's not good for a 5-year lease. He's not doing a business. He just needs a month or two creatively. Right. And to work with a friendly landlord. He can have the space when he needs it. And you say how dumb and naive that is in the world. But it does happen in friendships where it's shared space. And so then you see that somehow business organizes into a literalness. But you also see, if you then visited a world of everyone getting 7,000 a week for the rest of their lives, you see that they have a different setup.
Oh, yeah. That'd be so nice.
Where, or if you see that it's a billionaire club that you're in, you see that money, the literal money is not that big a deal, that there may be other hanging out. So that you see, so this dream somehow is that you had enough money to be free from money. But I would bring the dream more to a perspective where the dream is part of our life, not some foreign, separate thing. That hope is in fact an expression of ours, that we have a palette of expression. And that means you come from a place. So then you see the different ways of where you may need to be literal about something and figure it out literally and rationally. But you also see that there are things that at the same time that you have a literal circumstance, you also have something that almost has magical thinking in it. Because somehow each person knows each other in some way. Through a glance, through a thing, through a this, through a that. There's a shared experience. And I feel that you would not leave it until it is a clean thing for you, a pure thing for you. There's not a question, but you then experience the symptoms.
What would those symptoms be?
Shit, hurricane. Like you're seeing in the news there, the hurricanes, what they're doing to the homes down there, and okay, and it disappears in a moment, and the people have to rethink their lives. So a moment comes where they rethink. So that's the literal moment. I say it's in the process now of being reorganized.
Mm-hmm.
But it's happening in its own nature, not that, so somehow your presence, I would presume, is based on some perspective of there. At the same time, the story may argue with itself as part of its literalness. It's the missing aspect of it that touches closer to what it's about. Essentially, you can experience the missing before the missing. It doesn't have to literalize, but let's say you're in the Shanti aspect of your life. You can experience events that seem to be waiting in the future that are inherently in the situation, in how close people are to each other, and what it will experience through time and space. So I feel that you are kind of directing more of a film than a literal situation. You know what I mean? It has more creative dimensions to it. And that somehow part of it is creatively, everyone perceptively having a sense of being on board simultaneously. Unlikely. It's not a forced situation. It comes about, or if it is a forced situation, then it loses its creative edge. Yeah. So somehow discovery has a shared experience. And the shared experience is naive to the literal world or the rational world, but the shared experience opens up a doorway shared that's usually closed when the person's in survival alone. Because generally when people are in survival, they hide that very life that they share creatively. So in sharing a life creatively, there is a surrender somehow of life being organized around survival and continuity. When there's a feeling, it explores. And it explores the normal. And it discovers in the normal another dimension. When you have a discovery in the body that it's not your body, but you see something is illuminated that has been happening all along, this remarkable process of you navigating through this life with this body's processes and what you're going, you see this multidimensional existence has a literal problem. But it has a problem that forces it to look at its life. And when it looks at its life, it sees that it's not its life. That there has been some sort of creative cooperative going on all along. And that once the perception of it takes place, there is an I and thou that automatically enters into the life. you understand, when anyone looking at you can understand it. There's a thou happening in your life. And that is having a conversation. And that we've assumed the shape of that conversation. And somehow, if someone, something speaks to you, touches you, says, hey, baby, or whatever, it gives dimensions to what is happening. In the absence of that literal element, then you start to have more of a look into the world from being abstracted from it. Where you start to see death before dying, just as a process is happening to you anyway, but an event sends you there. And when you're sent there, you see it then through the glasses, where literally you see the conversation is about that anyway, but literally the conversation was about living and dying as a phenomenon. And so how somehow the world around you changes because of living and dying coming into your perception. And when it comes into your perception, it loses the death horror show into a living and dying process, seen very much from that. And then you see what dimensions of it are, the kind of holiness that runs through it.
Mm.
And it could even run through a Netflix show or something like that, where you see that thing running through it, but that somehow you see that you're hanging around. But that somehow the remarkableness of hanging around, where much of the world is not free to hang around.
Yeah.
You understand? And that one is striving to be able to have a life where they can hang around as they wish. And that somehow the premise was that you needed money to do so, to live a life of hanging around in a kind of relatively okay scene, a civilized situation. And you see that something illuminates it. And it shows you at the same time that you are having that creative challenge, 1 billion people would love to be in your place.
Mm.
They would think it's paradise. Are you kidding me? An argument in Pennsylvania? I'll grab that for a minute.
Mm.
Okay. So let's say that would be one movie they would all love to see, is the movie that you're in. Because it presumes to some degree a civilized life, to some degree, that it's like so to some degree, all of us have been able to have a civilized situation. There have been tough movements, there have been this, there have been that, but nothing like we see out there. We've somehow gotten all the experience that they've gotten out there. When you look at the films, how hurt they are or whatever, but then you also remember the moment when you were hurt, or how it ran through the story, or someone was hurt in relationship to you, and it seemed over nothing, but you see that the hurt runs through the story. It may have an issue that represents it, but the issue isn't it. The hurt is there, and then it finds a reason to be hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So then it literalizes. And then you see that the literalization of the hurt allows one to survive. It does seem to have a repetitive element of family or history in it. But when you look at it, it somehow allowed you to navigate the world because there's a repetition in the hurt. In family, there's somehow the hurt as an organic process is survival oriented. But when it is interrupted creatively, not because you're taking classes, although taking classes may be a reflection of a need for change, but something shifts in the plane where you see something that interrupts the continuity, and you give a life to your parents perceptively.
Mm-hmm.
Something that was hidden in your story, where they literalized as parents. But perceptively, you see there were people who were doing them, and it kind of reflects something that you've been doing. And you see a kind of element of continuity running through the life story. But in seeing it, I think you change it perceptively from history to mystery.
Mhm.
You meet your parents as people. In the history, your parents remain your parents throughout the story. In the mystery, your eye gives them a break from your possessive, and you see that they were human beings who happened to be parents.
Yeah.
Now your sentence to being happened to be, you understand, but that they had a life that was news to you. Because then your life were the fables or the stories that you made up or whatever, but not the whatever situations you went through in life. You can also see that they may have been going through even more. So then you see it from another place where it is in fact remarkably creative, because that element of the life is suppressed. It's expressed through entertainment, it's expressed through creative expression, but the literalization of it has no room for that experience. So you see that you reach the life that you lived through missing, because missing has a kind of purer self to it. It doesn't have the same motor. As it goes deeper, it starts to release the motive of this hold on the story it wants to see. And anytime it deeply desires to see, not for any motive or it's got past motive, but what happened in this life that I've lived, hidden in plain sight, is part of the reflective process that we're doing in sharing a circumstance where there is a sense of the life, not so much from the possessor, but no more of a possessive than if you were an actor in a film. And it may be your film, but it included 1,000 others.
Mm.
So if you were on there, you knew that it was a shared act, a shared experience. When you see the shared experience and the individual experience in retrospect, it's a privileged perspective. It changes it shifts the life from a continuity into life itself as a creative process. But if it happens perceptively to you that way, I think it happens literally also. And so your presence then brings a process that you're in to a circumstance. Where somehow it reflects on its normalcy. So then what you may stumble, will say, urge into a situation where it thinks it's normal. And you see all the ingredients in it. Okay. But you see, when it's interrupted, when the structure is interrupted, it's like a play is interrupted. Someone got sick, and so therefore they can't come in for the play, so the play is interrupted. And so you see that once the play is interrupted, all the characters are thrown in disarray.
Danny,
Yeah.
before I came on, I was talking to someone from Social Security, and I had the most profound talk with a delightful man. It was like I even told him about a book. I mean, and I was thinking of you. I said, that's what Danny is talking about. And I said, and I thanked him for giving me, making my day by being a human being with me, by being kind, and it was wonderful. And
Yeah.
I think, it's part that it's because of you also. I approach.
But you must have made his day then. So could you imagine?
That would be nice. That would be nice. I would like that.
That's okay. So let's say that hanging around means that time is up in the air. Now, again, it's wishful thinking if you get a pain in the neck. But now I'm also saying, applying my own perspective on Kai's Shanti perspective, that somehow you can put yourself into a place where you locate your body, or it's not your body. I'm using words, but you understand what I mean. It's somehow you're doing what meditation is hopefully do, where you block off the literalness of it, and you try to locate some workings that in yourself that are not so subject to anything.
Yeah.
And so let's say then that once you make a kind of, or you agree, or you share that space with anyone where it's normal to be able to look in that space beforehand, it's a shared space. So I say for me, that comes through discovery. Although I've been in the shared space at 4 a.m. where we're in the Himalayas and we're all having experience, or even hanging in Woodstock, we're all in one big room and 30 of us, and we're having a shared, so the Shakti is present in the situation, in the friendships where it's normal, and people on all levels are there, from scholars to poor people, strung out people, and but it's one movement. And so then in retrospect for me, and I say, holy shit, it's been an immersive of a few thousand characters over 50 years, intimately sharing life with people who dropped by and hung out for a couple of years. And there was no, who are you? What's your social security number? Or anything like that. Or somehow it normalized. And it was, and for a period of time, there was a thing of beauty happening, where there was a shared space, where there was no trip, even though the characters were remarkably different from each other. But then something happens here, so you start, and something happens there, and it starts to shift, because you think that some things that come whole then also start to fall apart, and whole and fall apart again. And so you're in flux, where the story is free to unfold. So an accidental experience there, a relationship there, a circumstance there, is actually this remarkable unfolding taking place creatively, but where lives came out of the experience. And children came out of the experience, and experience came out of the experience in such a way that it didn't have a history so much. And it may fumble in the literal world that demands that you have a literal history of yourself, but it comes then from a creative world where the mystery is more your history. And what's the Meshuggah history is, my dopey mommy and father fell in love and they made babies, and then they did whatever the hell they did. But I think they were truly in it when I came around. Let's say, I see evidence of it. So let's say, holy shit, can one be with the poetry of life, the schmaltz of life, the literalness of life, where somehow the impossible happens? And what is that? And that is, Urja has a conversation with Social Security person. And it's a human conversation, not so much about how to scam this one and how to get 10 more dollars there and screw this one. But it's a conversation. How you doing, baby? Must be a hard job also. Okay. And so let's say you come from that. There's a friendly in the story, and that's usually not allowed unless they make a friendly to sell something. But let's say the friendly is in fact a friendly. And then you see the underpinnings of the thing itself was that it becomes institutionalized. You also see the underpinnings of it had some sense of care running through it. So let's say you will be the first in your neighborhood to have had a conversation from someone from Social Security that you enjoyed. And Shanti's like, and possibly the person will remember you also in a nice way. We'll see.
Oh yeah, I was not bullshitting when I thanked him. I was really feeling it.
Did you give him a reading also? No, that would have had too much motive in it then, right?
No, but I could tell that he was a compassionate being. And I told him that. I said, thank you for being so kind and compassionate,
That's probably the first time he's heard something like that. Usually you yell at these guys or something, don't you? That they doubt your eligibility. I don't know. I haven't gotten yet into the interior of it.
Yeah.
I think this month I'll have to go into maybe an eye exam and then every year you have to get a new license here.
Mm.
So I then have to get a license then, and then I have to do things with the license. As I
Over
get,
a certain age.
yeah, over a certain age, you get it, you go every year to get it. And, but I haven't gone to the eye guy for quite a few years, so we'll see. So these are literal things where I enter literally into the world, but then I also have to have an examination coming up to see if there's any recurrence of cancer or so. That's been interesting. Where you get that every 8 months or every year or something like that to
Yeah.
see if there's any signs coming up, which I can, even though it's goofy and dopey, you're going in there, I've kind of, like I said, I humanized it by making, because I would do mañana. I would say maybe next week I'll do this or do that. Because time for me is not so much based on medical this or that. It's time is kind of, still I'm having a kind of naive agreement with myself to be with the story. And so therefore, it seems to be allowing me physically an okayness. But every year you have to look for the cancer to see if it's returned or recurred or whatever. But still, it's still, although I'm not doing anything, I'm not going anywhere per se, I'm hanging more or less. But still, I feel, and Ursula, you feel okay with it? You feel okay with being an 82-year-old French lady?
Yes, I
You sure about that? We can work on you where you can be
I feel very grateful.
year-old. I do have some mantras that you can turn back to being 53-year-old.
That's my age.
Yeah,
And you can turn me back to 33.
33. Okay, shall we start? Let's start thinking. Locate yourself at 33, if you can. A bit more. See if you can find some photos from that period and stuff from that period, just to remind you a bit more of it.
Yeah, I remember.
And, if you feel that's the period that that's Jesus's period, though.
Mm-hmm.
And although it's probably pretty good, I think if I was you, I would shoot for 33 also. And you want to try 53, Ursula, or you'll do 82? There may be some scary moments in 82. In your own movie, you can't.
Oh yes, yeah.
No. If you're writing the movie of you, then you can't get away with superficiality.
No.
But you can get away personally if you want to. But basically, if you are a creative act at this point in time, creatively, and you see from that perspective, you don't have to force that on yourself. You can see it from the perspective, all these perspectives that are happening. So if you're seeing it from 33, you're seeing it from 50 to 33. You see that somehow you have had a view of a future event hidden at 33.
Yeah.
But it didn't literally happen yet from 33. But you may have imagined it around 33. It's unfolding.
Mm.
So let's say you then move more in the world as an imagined experience, running alongside a literal experience. And you see how many dimensions exist in you that happen creatively when you're writing or putting something together. You see those dimensions. And there are moments that something happens where you view the life that you've lived from that place.
Yes.
And see how many dimensions that you've lived. At the same time that you've just been you, doing whatever you've been doing, all of this has been happening, and somehow it's illuminating. Not a future event, but in fact, hidden in plain sight has been this creative process. When it's revealed, for me, that's how it comes to us in creating this philosophy of us. When it's revealed, then it's second nature to you now. You re-enter the literal story from a different place. And then you start to see people who have pioneered this expression. You start to meet experts in the field, but you still have a vision. And the vision is that something illuminated changes the plane. It's not I change or you change or whatever, but something illuminated touches something where there is a whole being experience. And so the eyes were in service to the experience. The body was in service to the experience. But no longer comes back in, one comes no longer a me directed existence. You see the creative process that you're in, and then therefore you're meeting circumstances that are literal from a creative place. All you have is your present. All you have is a kind of creative truth on where you are in life. That somehow, like a Shiva or a Shakti, you make love when you're in love. You're not coming from hurt or need or this or those are elements, but there's a reserve space that's pure. However Meshuggah it is or whatever, you perceive that somehow there is a space, that there's a literal story, and then there's the evocative experience of the story parallel to it. And so you see that there is, and once you perceive it, there's a genuineness that comes in your perspective, that your relationship is to that feeling. And the premise also further of it is that like Mirabai and Krishna, when her husband saw her invoking Krishna into manifestation out of her love for him, he released her from the marriage to caring for her, but no longer that she was literally in the marriage. She saw that when you had a love, it exceeded the form, and the person released it, didn't fight with it, had this or struggle or whatever. The perception was the releasing of the hold of the story. And you see, until that releasing of the whole of the story, it's not a psychological act. The possessive would have acted. So the hurt would have been a possessive. And so you see that as the hurt becomes a possessive, then it becomes, you hurt me. Okay. And so the whole remarkableness of being hurt and being sent to a place, and someone so dopey like that could hurt me and send me to hell and beyond, and how could that be? And okay, so what kind of universe am I in that there's a hurt and hurt somehow? But then I'm writing about hurt, and then I see in my writing about hurt in the main character, I see how the hurt is a phenomena of the situation. It doesn't only have psychological elements, but from the creative perspective, you have to feel the hurt more than, just as if you were the director or the screenwriter, you feel the hurt more than the main character in the movie, because it has to be genuine for you, for it to be portrayed in a genuine way. You meet the question of creativity and a hidden life that has been there all along. And because it's usually a hidden life, it's called a secret life, and how to reach it and so on like that. But it's hidden in plain sight. And people who meet in that feeling meet in that hidden life, which is a shared life to them. Was that our guy out here? Yeah. That's Sammy out there barking. That must be Mary working out front. And Segway has been really chopping along out there. What do you say, Ursula? Are we okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Derek, you're managing?
Yeah.
Okay, as I say, what's normal for you, others would love to be in your situation. So let's say it's not a trick to get someone to see it, because basically the literalness of the life usually dominates it, where you only can access the creativity when it in fact is created. And there is a holy shit moment waiting. You say, holy shit, did I navigate through that whole thing? Did we get through this whole so-called thing out there as if it was normal, a pandemic, and this going on and that going on, and this, and you could see the flux in the air. Just looking out the window, you can see somehow an inherent flux that things are shifting. Who is this here that came in? Oh, that's Mary again, right? Anyone else
Yeah.
on? Anyone else on there, Kai?
Yes, Michael Bravo is making all kinds of comments. Sophia, Suleiman, and Jimmy.
What's the comment?
Yeah.
There are a lot. I can read through them. He's just making little statements. Never bolt a door with a boiled carrot. He who chases two rabbits catches neither. A frog in a well doesn't know the great ocean. It takes much longer to get up north the slow way. One cannot quarrel without an opponent. It is the same life whether we spend it crying or laughing. The eyes speak as much as the mouth. One day the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. Thought is action in rehearsal. In the small matters, trust the mind. In the large ones, trust the heart.
Okay.
The more perfect, do you want me to keep going? There are more.
No, I can, they're very good. And if we met, there would be something to explore, not determinations already. Because once you're in the space he's talking about, then it's not, they've not literalized as you would if they were instructions. So my man, look at this old geezer. He's going to be 82 in a couple of days. What kind of shit you want to tell me? I'm looking at the space. I don't negate what you're saying, but I can't be commanded by it. We're in flux. So I'm looking at it from that space. Now, what was the philosophy again? From the perspective of where I am, there's just like there's different time zones out there. There's different time zones in there. So you can understand that there's a literal aspect to the story, but then from the evocative aspect of the story where it's in flux and it's up in the air, then you see the deeper you see into the story, you're more released you are from the literalization of the story. You kind of die before you die. And as you die before you die, you bring another dimension into the life story that you're living, which is not the morbidity of dying. It is, in fact, recognizing a freedom that runs through the story that comes in the perception, where you are assuming identities towards certain experiences, just as if you have assumed an identity in a movie that you're making, and you've put your heart into it. You've put your heart into the identity. The broken heart is even more creatively than it would be in the literal world. Because as you enter into the creative world as more of your natural existence, then you start to see elements of creativity in what normally would have been slavery in the literal world. So your presence, just your presence alone, creates a conversation. And the conversations are not around truism. They're more, hey baby, or what's happening, but they're in the dumbness, in the schmuckiness of the conversation is an innocence or a friendship, where seeing is the main ingredient, not survival, not buck, not this, but you start to see, the deeper you see, just by being, you see coexisting dimensions in your life that now become normal for you. And so then you see that death is no longer literalized as death, even though we're not so dumb about the literal world. But you see a process that's happening. And when you see the process that's happening, something has shifted perspective. Now you can see that in the creative world. When you see that creatively, this happening, there's a breakthrough perceptively, it's introduced into your life, where you're coming from. So when your presence brings a dimension to the everyday, then the everyday is illuminated. You then meet Buddha, or you meet a Jesus, or you meet in perspective. You see there's an aha moment of friendship where your relationship is to being religious, not so much to religion that has a motive of continuity. You see that you would be in the same state or similar state as a Jesus, where you're in a holy shit state. You see something that may not allow you to literally live in this world. And at the same time, they're inviting it, they're fearing it. And so you then represent the dynamic because your presence is forced, just by your presence alone, there's something seen that the literal world resists seeing. So your presence represents an illumination. When it's illuminated, it cannot do slavery. That fear is the dominating force of continuity. Its continuity is not the dominant force. Then this exploration of this life, where continuity is an aspect of the experience, not the ownership of the story. You see that relationship has opened up parallel time. And so that at the same time that you were literally living in relationship, you're also living a parallel time of something to come home to, something to explore, something to break up with, something to connect with. But this whole secret dialogue that spills over into the literal life. But for us, it may become, in fact, the life that we've lived, this exploration of relationship and the dynamic that brings it together and separates it. And you see forces like that running through nature. You see that forces like that running through science. And you see inherently in every form, humanity is reflective of all the other happenings that are taking place. It's a sharing a dynamic. And the perception of that changes the picture to some degree. So I agree and disagree, if that matters, because, you know, literally in one sense, but basically, do you want to be left with those axioms then, Michael, or do you want to explore it further? Because for me, I'll hang around a bit longer if it's relevant, but I feel that those are good study points. If one's life is devoted to the journey, and I feel you are. Okay, any response to that, or shall we wait until some other time?
Yeah, not yet.
No. Okay. So any time that, but let's say in our own real time, our everyday somehow reflects dimensions, but your access to that reflection is based on somehow a state that you're in.
Yeah.
So, and I say why? I say because then the observation tends to literalize.
Yeah.
As rules. And you see there were insights.
It's a problem with religion, isn't it?
That's why I'm saying where the insight then literalizes as a way to.
Yeah.
So then, so it's rather interesting then, you see all the attempts as a way to have an experience that's hanging right there. But that somehow you intuitively know it requires the experience of a parallel lie is not a possessive. The deeper you go into the experience that one has, the less you see that it is a possessive of the self. So it is kind of barred from one seeing that as long as one literally is surviving. Everything else, like you see with Putin, and you know, like survival, woof, boy, becomes the main ingredient. That's Sammy, you know. Sammy is a huge black dog there with one eye. Lost her eye when someone threw a stick and hit her in the eye years ago.
Oh.
Thank you, Shorty. Okay, no other questions are happening, or you're okay? Yeah, what were you asking?
Music. Can you talk about music?
The exploration of music. Well, look, you could see how even the hearing of music or the feeling of the beats of music goes through your body where you're having a shared experience. So something in music allows a shared experience. And it can cut through different forms or different shapes or whatever, and it can be a shared experience. Okay, so it is a way of communicating past the identity structure, meaning what? If identity is based on where you're born and where you come from and the literal, and that's who you are literally. And then you meet another tribe of people who know they have more of a creative life. They weren't, so they're exploring who they are. So one form of the music that they would make is usually a tribal one that would connect the tribe.
Mhm.
That everyone in the tribe would know each other. When they looked at each other, they would hear the beat, and that even can come from hippiedom and rock and roll and everything like that to a kind of whatever. If you understand it deeply, you can all wink or tap your foot or move it or share an experience. And those who share an experience sometimes devote themselves to the experience. And it becomes an expression or a dream for them, where music then becomes a dream as a way of living, a way of, somehow living a creative life where the ups and downs of life are normal because you see you're in somehow a creative life and there's a constant exploration that's happening in a creative life.
Yeah.
So once you perceive that, then you perceive that every expression in it has a little element of that's what's happening. So then you're expressing yourself through the music, and there'll be someone who hears it. And usually, depending on if it's part of the exploration, it'll be someone who's kind of in that space who will hear it.
Mm.
There may be a resistance in others to, So
Right.
let's say, in simply being, you're having a conversation with the mystery. And music, or any time that you can be genuine in the expression, you're having a conversation with the energy. So then that music becomes to you something that is no longer incorporated into the story or possessed or something. It's something that you're caring for. So I feel that there is a conversation happening now, not to get literalized into the world's elements of that. There is a purity in it, meaning you would find yourself difficult to run across the room and grab someone. Right?
Depending on the situation, if they were attacking my children, it would not be difficult.
No, I'm saying that you found a boyfriend and say, hey, come over here, that you're the guy.
Oh yeah, no, I like to be approached. It's hard for me to approach.
So let's say, understand why. So somehow it's always nice to be invited.
Mm.
And I say, because I said there's so many dynamics in the invitation, the face in the crowd, the dialogue, no motive, the interruption of the history. So there's a dynamic to some degree happening. So you understand that there is a genuineness running through the creative story that's not in a literal story. And what would that be? In the literal story of power, they're supposed to be taking care of everyone, not screwing them like that.
Right,
So you
exactly.
understand. So they can't be. So somehow it's working towards a future possibility. Okay, if humankind comes to that, but you also understand that is what's happening in your own life, in your own circumstance. There is a kind of looking out for each other. So you see a missing element that normalizes the world, but is not normal. And in missing that feeling, it's missing a dimension that allows it to continue and allows it to do something that it will regret in time, that and in reflection, and see itself in a different place. But let's say you're coming from that place consciously. And then you have a literal life. And it's no mystery why you are in a literal situation. It is, in fact, for you a creative situation. But one thing is that once it starts to have real-time influences of you can't take it anymore, this is not true, this is a case loss, it's because you are taking the temperature of a circumstance. It doesn't have to react. You are seeing when it starts to lose its reality, its essential reality,
Yeah.
it then becomes a prison for everyone.
Right.
So for you, you'll become conscious if it becomes a prisoner of survival over if you don't have to love or even respect each other, you just because you need it. And I say, so in that, I think that okay. So that is the balancing act. When something that is really beautiful, I think, in what you're doing, if you see it in retrospect, then when it turns to shit, and they say, you were never there and you were not that, you could see an argument waiting. But then
I
you
can't
also,
say I was never there because that's
no, I can't, I'm not saying you were never, I'm not saying you can't blame the accusation 20 years later. So then I say, and they say, well, what does that mean? It was a shared experience, but then you see remarkable play that you're in. And you're working with memory, you're working with this, so you are working with going into the story, your presence will be remembered. So I think you are working with energies within the story in a shared life. And that may come about as you remember, and you then meet someone from years ago and the impossibility of it. Well, that's also happening all the time here. And so that's what's also once that thing of sleep was awakened, then also forgetting from the creative perspective was no longer using it for your ego or to avoid or to survive. So then you saw a difference between the survival you and that when the creative you was no longer limited to the survival, it saw another dimension. It survived in order to be creative. It didn't survive as its own accord. And so when you saw that, I think that you introduced that into the situation. So I feel then you put in motion certain things. You still are into it?
yes. And yes. But I do wonder what more there, I just had this funny feeling the other day. It feels more cohesive. I even said to Rod, we should get a family picture with Karen and her daughter, his girlfriend, because it just feels like more of a cohesive energy now.
Okay, so let's say that you are, that would have been the holy shit question if you would have raised it a year ago.
Right.
So can you see the flux of it? So once the story humanizes to some degree, it frees you. The only question is that they still love you in some way. So their attempt to try to hate you doesn't allow them to get out of really having feelings for you. So they may have practiced that. But I feel that you're a pretty remarkable thing that you're in. I think that you'll write about it and perform it one day and express it. So I think you're there, even though it's been a challenge. It had to be a challenge to reach a certain place in you, to let it know what it is to be in a kind of stranger in a strange land in a situation that is normal.
Right.
But you experience an energy that then in retrospect, you experience that your presence, my presence always, if you were there with tough people and this and that, you understood they intuit in you somebody, not that will tattle on them, but tell on them, but is not of the same kind of thing, is coming from a different place.
Yeah.
So I feel that the reason you're there is because there's no bullshit in the central place for you. But that you have been free all along, but free doesn't mean license. It meant that creatively, if something is speaking to you strongly, even though you're free to go everywhere in the world, you kind of, your freedom is there for the creative, for something that's true.
Yeah, that's it.
You know, so and so that's somehow it's all been with you. Otherwise, it looked like it was going to explode any given time over
Yes.
some issue or something like that. But the issue had to make you into a real rat. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so somehow, and I don't think they can do that with a straight face. But not in our company anyway. So let's say we use the medium creatively and let it enter into the circumstance to some degree. So even the kids knowing us and us waving hands and friends coming by or whatever is also part of a creative expression where somehow it becomes real.
Mm.
And the conversation, even though they're kidding around at times and not exactly kidding around, they have hidden them a kind of, hey, baby, or how's everything going kind of thing going on there. The kind of recognition that we're sharing a creative space.
Mm-hmm.
And the creative space just perceptively is sacred in the perception. And sacred means something shared between the people. It doesn't have to mean the literalization of it into rules and regulations. It is something deeply shared between people, even in the passing, that then manifests normally in the conversation. I think that you now bring that to the space.
Yeah, I mean,
I
that feels
feel
like
that.
the most,
So
that feels,
Jai asked me about the Shanti, and I said, my feeling is I did come from before Shaktipat with Muktananda when we met, but then there was, and then when I was also in Rishikesh, so that was all normalized in the things that we were doing, from mantras to a Shaktipat and this a shared feeling. So there was a shared feeling. It was always a shared feeling. Somehow allowed something to take place. If one woke up and thought it was bullshit or something like that, it may change the whole perspective of something. But for a moment, people were there for something. And you also see in creative acts, in community acts or creative acts, where they're there for the moment. Whatever their arguments are in the neighborhood, they may be there for the creative expression with each other. So there's something that allows a shared space. When the shared space is deep enough over time, there is an immersive that takes place where somehow each person takes that experience into what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you see that you have been more in this immersive throughout your travels, where
mm-hmm.
the memory of each other is each other in some way, and people meet through memory. Even if they're not literally in contact or for years or something, they may meet now in memory. And that memory is more real than the literal reality in some way. Because there's a, hey baby, how you doing? Have you survived it all? And how have you navigated? But then you also see that somehow it comes to another space of genuineness. That somehow we have lived the spiritual life. That somehow the Shakti Pat, even though it may have been this and that, somehow all these people did live a kind of Shakti Pat life. They may have still had fights and they've broken up and they've done all this, but somehow they think it's like normal, but they've lived a kind of Shakti Pat life.
Yeah, when you're in that, it feels normal.
Okay, so then you see, but then you find normalcy in the Shakti Pat life also takes place.
Mm-hmm.
But you also see another thread running through it. So then it's like people who made a movie together and falling in love and having relationships, but they've come out of a movie. So the movie has entered into their marriage and their life. So then you see all the expressions that were normal in the Shaktipat life, then go into their everyday life, but now they're normal people. But they're still doing a kind of Shaktipat. Everybody has a little element of the Shaktipat expression in them, or the experience in them. And so when you're waving at that, when you wave past them, you may not literally get along with their life anymore, but you've shared an experience. And that somehow, that shared experience allows you to meet.
It does.
If that experience is not there, then literally usually the situation is not there. So you share that experience. That's what you've shared throughout your life. And that's what you'll share in the music. That'll come out of the perspective. And it's coming out of that. The only question is that you're also, you understand flux. So there is no literal so for you, you won't be able to make a religion out of the experience.
No.
The experience allows you to be creatively free, where you're coming from a different place, where survival isn't the dominant force with you, it's an aspect, is that there's certain experiences waiting, that you have a relationship now out there, and you see that there have been well, you also find people out there who kind of respect the energy in some way when they're talking about whatever field they're in. But somehow they're coming from some energy or some feeling that somehow, so they may seem naive in the real literal world. Because for those people, they always have to consider if they're doing more damage or not by literalizing, signing a lease for 5 years when they don't know they want to be there for 5 years, and the landlord, everyone say, no, you got to sign the lease for 5 years. And
Or signing with a record label.
No, or
Selling our music.
No, or for you getting the vaccine or something like this is like signing a contract where you don't know that you can honestly be there for that longer term, but you also understand how the literal world is working. So then you're figuring creatively how to navigate that. But you also understand that there's a thread that runs through it that's contractual, where your life is more creative.
Yeah.
Than that, so then you see, then you could say to the landlord, could I sign maybe 1 year or something like that? I think I can work that one out already, So you try to have a friendship that's naive, but a friend who has a place to rent, then you can have a kind of creative conversation with. So somehow a feeling allows a creative part to enter into a literal situation, where you could have that honest conversation. You say, I don't know that I can do 5 years in the situation I'm in. Can we do this or that? So you're negotiating something. I feel that as you're negotiating something, you're introducing more of the human element into it. Where a promise is not a contract. A promise is a shared feeling. But you're not forcing a person to be a slave from that perspective. So I feel that, are you throwing yourself more into the music lately?
I am feeling some sort of a deep passion to explore it, and I'm not sure what it's evolving into, but I just
More of a Laurie Anderson kind of,
I don't know.
Laurie, well, that's some elements. There's some interesting people out there now.
I'm exploring the blues for 1 year. I'm giving myself 1 year to explore the blues because I never have. And so I'm writing a bunch of blues songs. And then probably on to jazz. I'm not sure.
Well, I hope we can hear them.
Yeah, that should be nice.
He goes playing guitar, so
what style does he play?
Well, he wanted me to learn blues because he wanted to jam on blues, but he didn't know I was going to get this far in. But he ultimately, he plays all styles because at his music school. But he wants to ultimately do jazz and fusion, so I'm working in that direction so we can play together.
Well, there is, if you hear Charlie Parker's, what is it, Derek, again?
Love
One
Supreme.
Pleasure sings.
Love Supreme.
I'm feeling low down and blue.
Okay.
Heart full of sorrow.
So Charlie Parker, Charlie Parker, who actually created one of the forces that created a break somehow from jazz and blues into his own expression. And I think most of the guys I knew, because we were there it was kind of dependent on all of them being addicted to heroin. They could reach certain notes that couldn't be perceived without that space. And so we loved it, you know. But then, so you have that sound, but then King Pleasure came along and put words to that sound. A big explosion in the world around that time. They said that was doing something wrong to Parker's music. But then what the kids would do, even if you didn't read music, if you sung that song, you saw the song immediately in yourself.
Going to Kansas City. That's what it is, right?
You keep your and yeah. You want to sing it?
No, I mean, that's all I really remember. I'm feeling low down and blue, heart full of sorrow.
So no, so
Don't
that's
hardly know what to
the
do.
story was that Parker said he would never go back to Kansas City unless he died.
Okay.
So then the song is feeling low down and blue, my heart full of sorrow, don't know what to do. Where will I be tomorrow? I'm going to Kansas City. When you see me coming, baby, raise your window high. So what he's talking about is his casket is going down the street and some horses are pulling it. And the top is open. And if you open your window, you can see him down there and he's smiling. He says, and he says, like, with a smile on my face, I'm waving at you, and he's got a gold tooth. But so he says, raise your window high. When you see me come and hang your head and cry. There ain't nothing in this fiendish dreamy town a honky monkey woman can do. She only put herself down. So long, everybody, going to Kansas City. So then that song run. But what it was for us young guys there was we kind of understood bebop when they, from the song, we just had the words would give us completely the whole riff. So he may be interested in seeing how King Pleasure and Babs Gonzalez put words to the riffs and made them into a kind of walking by yourself poetry or talking to yourself poetry that came out of it at the time.
Yeah, that's something. He's not so much into the words. I'm more of the word person, but yeah, that would be fun to explore.
Well, that's what I was saying, with the sound into words, where young people who didn't know music, but could do the whole song, you know, with you know, at the same time, but didn't literally know. The neighborhood kids didn't. I think even doo-wop and all that came out of that in the streets there. But I think there was a movement there, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, quite a few people who were really experimenting with the music that kind of made a break, that influenced us strongly. And then when they made it with Spanish music, then Machito and Charlie Parker played together, and this was Afro-Cuban. So there was a whole movement that was just happening normally in New York at the time. And then in high school, doo-wop came for me then, you know, and we knew most of the bands were going to school with you. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, so when you're in the milieu, growing up with it, but he seems like he's really wants to throw himself into it. Is he doing modern stuff at all, or?
Well, that's what they do. The shows they do at the Collective are mostly rock and roll because that's what sells tickets. So they did 80s. And then they did Beatles, and now they're doing Pink Floyd. The next big show is Pink Floyd.
Do they look into
studies jazz. Huh?
Do they look into John Zorn at all?
Tico could privately with his teacher, but most of the kids aren't interested in that, and that wouldn't sell tickets. So the big shows they do are mostly more popular music because they have to sell tickets.
No, that's okay. I think that's
but Dave his teacher loves that Tico is into jazz because he said very few students ask about it. So it's really putting a lot of energy into him, which is nice.
That's great. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
I love it. I love his teacher, and I love what they're doing together.
That's okay. You're doing some nice work. You want the job?
That job, yes. I like that job.
You have that job. You have that job. You're looking out for something. Seems okay. Derek, you're okay?
All is well. Thanks.
Okay. And Erja, you'll survive?
Well, yes, we'll see. Yeah, it looks like it.
Who else is on there then? I see that must be Mary then. Huh?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think her.
Okay, yeah. And I hope that's okay with Michael Bravo, that it's always nice. The only thing is that you don't want the perspectives to become rules that literalize, but that they allow you access. In other words, every time you have an insight, it allows you an access that's hidden in plain sight in the everyday. So when you start to see the mystery hidden in the history, that in the life that you're living, in the inherent everydayness of it, something may happen that allows you a perspective where you get a glimpse of the energy running through the story. And it laughs at you.
Mm.
It waves at you and laughs at you. And you also, I'm trying to see where that was explained one time when love left the story and you saw it leaving the story, and it waved at the people who were in the story, where the feeling left, and they were left with the literalness of the story. And of course, they're not going to they're going to try to force meaning onto, because meaning left. Meaning left, then you try to literally give a rationale to the continuity. And all of the rationales reflect some elements of a fragmented truth. As the feeling leaves the space and the continuity becomes dominant more than else. The continuity that was in the service of the affection becomes the continuity that's in the service of the survival. That goes from love to hate, because then what was a cooperative becomes a competitive. And you see it trickle down in the literal world in its own expression, where you're subject to the forces. When the feeling leaves the story, then the literalness of the story becomes its reality, and usually survival is the dominant force, or the continuity of it. So people who cooperated very deeply, what they shared intimately was the basis of a shared life. When that is broken, that intimacy then becomes close to hatred in some cases. Because somehow the intimacy has to be intimacy. If it's lacking that feeling, then it becomes all sorts of literal things out in the world. So I feel that once one has the creative perspective of life, one is re-entering the story from a different place, where you see that there's a creative dialogue that's been happening all along, but now is illuminated. And so from that perspective, you see that all of life is missing a heartfelt conversation. The only thing is, it truly has to be heartfelt. It can't be in the style of, because the depth of it touches something and changes, I think, even the molecular structure of the thing. So I hope that further, but I'll take some of the questions a bit further. One book you may like to read again is that book, Breath. I had to look through it again. But it takes you on a nice journey.
Yeah.
You know, just the exploration of something like that then takes you around the world exploring something that's normal. And you start to see a whole other sacred dimension in it. Okay, I hope to see you. I'll see you maybe with Derek tomorrow night or Sunday.
Happy birthday, Danny.
Thanks for.
Have a wonderful birthday.
Okay, I'll see you.
Thanks,
Maybe
Dan.
I'll see you
Thank
Sunday
you.
then.
Yes.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.